For those of you who don't know me, my name's Alex Williams, and I'm co-course leader here at Bucks on the Animation and Visual Effects course. And we're also launching, this is kind of our soft launch today, a new online MA in animation, which will launch this September. And we think it's a pretty unique thing because it involves not just practical training in how to be an animator, but also academic content as well, leading to an MA. And as far as I know, it's the first one of its kind around the world. So what we thought we would do today is talk about the general state of the animation industry, in particular in the UK. And we're very lucky to have some very distinguished animation guests to come and talk about the business here and also what it's like for students and, of course, how to get that crucial first job so that you can break into the industry, which I'm sure a lot of you will want to know about. I'd certainly like to know about it myself. So we're very lucky. We have Shelley Page, who's from DreamWorks. Shelley's worked for DreamWorks pretty much since it began. And she does international outreach and recruitment. So spends a lot of time looking at portfolios, student portfolios, and also hiring for what is, as you know, one of the best and most successful animation companies in the world. We also have Bob Thompson, who's from Film London. And Bob is in charge of bringing foreign investment into the UK, in particular American investment in animated films. So Bob doesn't just know what's going on in London now, he knows what's coming in 6 months' time, what's coming in 12 months. So he's able to look over the horizon and see what kind of jobs are coming to London over the next few years. And we also have Adam Lucas, who's one of my former colleagues from Cinesite. We worked on films like Beverly Hills Chihuahua together, which I'm sure you've all seen. He also worked on the Harry Potter series and on 300 and other excellent big visual effects films. And he also does some work here at Bucks teaching rigging to our students. So that's our panel. What I thought we'd do is I will ask a few questions of all the panelists, and then when we're done with that, I'll throw it open to questions from the floor, and we'll also show some cool stuff. Shelley's got some DreamWorks eye candy here to show you all, and some general stuff on student portfolios and what goes into a great portfolio and what kind of portfolio you need to break into the industry. So first of all, I think what we'll do is just have everyone give us a brief introduction on where the industry is going here in the UK, and what the present and the near future are looking like. So Shelley, why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
Right, well that immediately puts me at a huge disadvantage because although I live in the UK, I actually hire people for everywhere but the UK, so apologies for that in advance. DreamWorks Animation has multiple locations. We have 2 locations in Northern California, which are in the process of being consolidated into one, which will be in Glendale, Los Angeles, on our primary campus. But we also have relationships with other studios globally working on projects for us. For example, Bardell in Vancouver are working on a lot of TV projects for us. But my role in recent years has been mostly to find a diaspora of artists from all over the world for our studios in India and most recently China. We've just set up an enormous studio in Shanghai in China. So I think my first comment apropos where is the UK animation industry heading is I would say to anybody graduating in the next year or so, think globally. Because although the UK is an absolute stronghold of fantastic visual effects and has really great projects coming in, there are a lot of independent companies frequently setting up and interesting projects coming. For anyone who's interested in feature animation, getting that bit of international experience is the key because it's a different world out there, literally. So what I look for at the moment are, young talents who are adventurous, who are prepared to take a big leap of faith, as certainly Alex has done in the past, I've done in the past, and who aren't sort of hidebound into following a certain career path, because this is a time of change, transition, and flexibility. So when I'm interviewing people, I'm looking for openness. I'll tell a short but negative story about a delightful, delightful Chinese girl who was studying in France who I interviewed last summer. And she came all the way to Paris to have an interview with my big boss. And she absolutely failed in the first sentence when we said, so, what do you think about going to Shanghai? And she said, oh, no, I'm not really interested in that. End of conversation. So rule one, I would say, is be open to opportunities. Having said that, you know, the UK is where I got my start. I worked at the Richard Williams Animation Studio and then at Amblimation in London. Following that, another huge studio startup to make Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So all my early experience was working at a very large organisation, but luckily for me, based on my home turf. So that's kind of the best of both worlds. But for, you know, in general, I would say all of us look for very, very similar things. Number one is actually enthusiasm. You can't underestimate how important it is in an interview situation to actually come across as someone who wants the job. You would be really surprised how many people are either just gutted by shyness or intimidated or whatever, and you're finding yourself trying to pull information out of them. Don't be like that. You know, practice on your friends, sell yourself. So, you know, the skills are obviously something that we would expect you to have, but the thing that will nail the job is your personality. So that's my sort of first gasp on this panel. Excellent. Is be open and enthusiastic.
Okay, great. So just keeping on the theme of where the industry is heading now, and then obviously we'll go into more detailed portfolios and so on later. Bob, can you tell us a bit about what the picture is looking like in London and the UK?
Okay, well, I'm going to start with the BFI stats that came out about a month or so ago, which said the UK was producing 52 million worth of animation production, which compared to the year before was 12. I'd say now's a great time to be graduating because there are going to be jobs and opportunities. What I see particularly looking around the London studios is there's a lot of expansion in both 2D cell action particularly and with CGI studios. There's an awful lot of opportunities there. The one thing I hear most frequently from producers is that there's opportunities for people who can draw. Storyboarding is a really key issue. We actually ran a course this summer with Frank Gladstone to cross-train more live-action storyboard artists to train them over into animation. So I think anyone that's interested in particularly the areas around pre and post for animation, that there's certainly going to be major growth areas because, and the reason for it is that the way the UK tax credit works, it encourages co-production, and currently the most tax efficient, financially efficient co-production is to do something along the lines of pre-production in the UK or pre and post in the UK, and a lot of the service work for animation is going overseas at the moment.
Could you explain, Bob? Probably a lot of our audience won't know what the UK tax credit means. Okay. Could you explain that for
Yeah, if you produce animation for TV in the UK or you produce a film in the UK, you get the government gives the company doing the work a tax relief, so it reduces your tax bill. Now, lots of countries do similar things. Canada does it, Ireland does it, France does it. Australia, New Zealand, but the way the different countries load these things makes it more efficient. Looking at the overall budget for particularly big projects, long-running TV series and films, for the work to be split over two countries, or sometimes more than two countries, but often two countries. That means that currently the UK is very tax efficient for anyone that wants to invest in doing their pre and post production here. So it's great news if you're a voiceover actor, it's great news if you do storyboarding, it's great news if you do design work, and to some extent model building and rigging, texturing, that kind of stuff often gets placed in the UK. Keyframe animation, it's less good news, but there's still a lot more jobs in the industry this year than last year. The other trend that I'm kind of looking at for this year going into next year, right now we don't have any animated films in production in the UK, and I know of at least, actually, so like one's just started pre-production, but I know of at least 6 or 7 that are looking to relocate here in the next 12 to 18 months. Some of those won't happen, but my guess is that
that's a large number.
That's a lot more than I've seen in any previous year. So I think those are areas of interest. My expectation is for entry-level jobs, there's going to be a limited number of those in the theatrical jobs, but what will tend to happen is people in TV who are working on TV projects step into that, and that will leave shoes that will fill up in those areas. So I would definitely, if you're interested in CGI, look around the CGI studios, and same with cell action. Those would be the big thing. The number one thing I would say to anyone looking for their first job in, make your CV really, really easy to read. You know, when I look at CVs, I'm often trying to recruit 50 people in 8 weeks, and you have about 20 seconds per CV. So really, the first thing I want to see is key skills. Yeah. So if you're a character animator who models and rigs, I want to see character animation, secondary skills, modeling, rigging, right at the top.
Yeah.
Then I want to see your experience, then I want to see your qualifications and training. And I want to see that on a page, please.
Yeah, we have a CV workshop here during Activities Week at Bucks. I forget what day it is. I may be able to look that up before the end, but I know that there's a workshop going on where you can polish CV skills. Excellent, thanks Bob. So Adam, maybe you can talk a little bit about the visual effects industry, which traditionally has been a real source of strength. So we both worked at Cinesite, which about a year ago had a bit of a collapse and lost a lot of people.
Well, yeah, it's not unknown for companies to grow and shrink and change size a lot. In fact, it happens all the time. Certainly with movies, projects, big projects, companies get them, they take on a load of staff, and then on the expectation that it will continue, they try and keep the staff, but quite often have to let them go. So it's a kind of a rolling wave. You get a rolling wave of job possibilities. But then again, looking at these companies, how do you get in? How do you start with things? So again, if your expectation is always to go in, or I'm a character animator, I'm going to be a character animator, you may find the only way into a company is to take something on a slightly lesser basis that will actually just get you in, like something like, if you're in 2D, a bit of rotoing, or possibly some working with mocap or something like that, some process that will get you into the environment and working in the environment, because the larger houses do have quite a turnover of people, so you can move up with reasonable alacrity. Another way to approach this would be to say, well, I need to build up a basic portfolio of jobs. I mean, that's basically what I did to start out. I worked initially with a very simple 3D system, plotting out stuff for 2D paint and trace, and from there I persuaded somebody to buy me some kit and moved into doing ads and things for TV. And I think that is a reasonable way. Again, the opportunities have broadened out with possibilities of working, things like producing apps for games, or phones and whatever. You have a broader range of possibilities of building up a portfolio.
But I think the visual effects industry is in pretty good health, isn't it?
Visual effects, there was a period where it went down, again to do with tax issues. It's growing back again.
I saw Framestore was hiring.
Yeah.
Admittedly, some of those jobs are in Canada.
Well, again, Shelley said, be prepared to travel.
Yeah.
It's global. It's now a global industry, and there are lots of jobs, but A, they might not be exactly what you think you want, and B, they can be in a completely different country. So again, I would agree with Shelley. Be open to the possibilities, and there is a lot there. It is bubbling away. There's lots going on. You just have to think possibly laterally about, maybe you can do a bit of mocap tweaking to get you into character animation, rather than necessarily saying, I'm going to be a character animator and that's me. Or if you want to go a different route, you could start with a small company looking for somebody who's more of an all-rounder to get
Well,
One thing we haven't mentioned is we're talking about big studios and a traditional pathway into a career on large projects. But the thing that I've noticed in recent years is the increasing number of startups and particularly graduates deciding to set up micro studios and building from that into really interesting new environments. I mean, a lot of that could be online or in projects that aren't mainstream. But I think I wouldn't rule that out as another way of getting into
I was actually talking to Ollie Hyatt, who runs Blue Zoo.
He was a Bournemouth graduate, wasn't he?
He was a Bournemouth graduate. But the thing that was interesting, he left college, couldn't get a job. So 3 of them decided that they'd make a pilot in someone's garage over the summer when it wasn't too cold. And basically they set themselves the target of being done by September. So that they could take it, they took their show to market. They got a pickup from Nick and started making shorts and moved into a small office.
When you say Nick, you mean
Nickelodeon.
Nickelodeon. Yeah.
So I mean that was how they started there. Now I think I was there the other week. There are, I think 180 seats over 4 floors in a office just off Euston. I mean it's a phenomenal story. And this is what 15 years.
Yes.
And he's still.
No, and Blue Zoo are hiring. One of my online students just got a job with them, so they're obviously doing well. So that's actually a nice segue into the next question, which is I'd like all the panelists to explain how they got their first job, because it can be more strange than you might think. You know, sending in a CV and having somebody say, yes, here's a job, here's your desk. It doesn't always happen that way, and some of us fell into the industry in an unusual way. So just briefly, how did you guys get your first job, starting with
some
Shelley?
of us were born into the industry. Well, I got my first job in animation from his dad, so which did come about in a very bizarre way, because I was an illustrator for many years. Actually, I graduated from Kingston, and I was quite happy being an illustrator. But then I, by complete accident, got an interview with Richard Williams, who did the classic thing and said, "You should come and work for me. You could be a star." So I kind of thought about it for a bit, and it was very different. I'd never thought about animation as a career at all, but I'd gotten to the point where I really found it frustrating working on my own as an illustrator, because you're always up at midnight or 3 in the morning. You always have unappreciative clients who set you a deadline for Friday night, and you know perfectly well they don't need it till Monday morning. So I got pretty fed up with that. So
it's just like animation.
Well, animation's different because you're doing the same thing but with other people suffering alongside you, you know. So when I started my first day at the Richard Williams studio, I walked into Dick's office, and he did the absolutely classic thing, having agonized over this decision to change careers. I walked in and said, "I'm here," and he said, "Great, you're here, what will you do?" And I was just absolutely nonplussed. I thought, oh my God, you know, he's completely mistook what my talents were. But actually, it was the best possible thing that could have happened to me, because what I realized rather painfully over the course of 6 years working with Dick Williams is that I was required to take the initiative and to figure out what I was good at, and then figure out how to gain the skills that would help me be better at it. And I'll tell you, that is a life lesson that I wouldn't have missed for the world. So I ended up doing everything. I ended up being a producer. At one point I was in charge of the camera room, but I'm primarily an artist. So I ended up as a background artist. And when the Roger Rabbit film came along, I was the head of backgrounds on Roger Rabbit. So what I found out, because I was working in this wonderfully flexible environment, is that there are actually lots of things I could do that I didn't know I could do. So being in charge of a team was one of those things. So my entire career since then has kind of followed on in that path.
I may say that Shelley has always sounded like she knew what she was talking about. So even though you say now that you didn't know, it seemed to me at the time that you were fully in control.
No, didn't know a thing. I'm very, very good at blagging. I'm still to this day one of the best blaggers. I follow people around as they get studio tours just to sort of listen. But seriously, it was a fantastic opportunity to go from being a single individual artist, which I did quite successfully, to being part of a creative team. And I never, ever, ever look back from that point, because to be surrounded by a team of people whose work is much better than yours, doing incredibly inspiring things, changes your life. You know, as an artist, as a creative person, to be part of one of those big teams is just wonderful. You feel privileged, you really do. And I've never changed my opinion about that. So that was how I got into the industry.
Excellent. Bob?
Okay, my story's not quite as funny as Shelley's. My first job in television was as a researcher for Great White Shark, looking at shark footage. And so that was how things started, and that was purely
Actual sharks.
Sorry? Sharks.
Actual sharks.
Actual
Not-
real sharks.
Not animated sharks.
No, David Attenborough narrated it. It
Cool.
was about great white sharks, and they wanted a researcher, and I just graduated, and I kept tropical fish. So that was my qualification for knowing all about sharks and predation.
Yeah, brilliant.
10 years later, my first job in animation proper was as an exec producer, because I'd created a successful toy. If anyone ever played with Bionicle as a kid,
You created that?
I was one of the co-creators
Oh
of Bionicle. That allowed me to, not only I created the toy world, but I created the world for the games, and then they decided they were going to make an animated film. I'd worked in television for 10 years. I was the person put in charge of making the animation film. And that was...
And
so
did you-
I went straight in as exec producer.
You have to do everything for the first time at some point.
So, you know,
Yeah.
but really, I was there to approve and make sure that I'd done a lot of writing and script editing, so that kind of was what qualified me to be a producer. Really, it was about telling a story, and whether you're telling the story in animation or whether you're telling the story in live action doesn't. At that level, doesn't make a huge difference. However, I did make sure we hired a really, really good producer who knew exactly what she was doing. Sue Shakespeare at Creative Capers had been Don Bluth, and she was 40 years in the industry.
Yeah.
It was brilliant.
But that's the trick, isn't it? To hire people who make you look good.
Exactly. Have people
That's
who
right.
know what they're doing the jobs you need them to do that you can't do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think that's
And Adam, how did you get into visual effects
Well,
work?
basically, I was an art student and came to the end of my course and didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. And then
Where did you study?
St Martin's.
St Martin's.
And then I was watching television, and there was a Horizon. I don't know if you know the program. It's a documentary on early paint system that coming out of New York University. And I thought, wow, that looks amazing. I want to get involved in that. So I dug around some local places in London, and basically I found somewhere that was just setting themselves up with early Macintosh computers, the upright ones, and I discovered they had a paint system and everything. So the guy who was running it, I eventually managed to persuade to get me an early 3D system. It was basically based on a PC. And from that, I set up, he got me a plotter, a pen plotter, and I managed to make some models for a traditional 2D animator who found it very difficult to actually get things in perspective. So I managed to create that, plot it out, and he used that for paint and trace. And that snowballed a bit, and then I left that place and went into TV advertising and started out that way. And then 10 years later moved into movies.
And that's still a very busy industry, isn't it? I mean, advertising is
hugely,
always
yeah. I mean, it's
dependable.
Yeah, and with this kind of technology, it's a bedrock now. It's a given. So there's always work in that field. That's how I started out. I mean,
Excellent. Good. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about how graduates might break into the industry. And let's start with a sort of the most common mistakes that people make. And because I think we've all made mistakes at interviews, mistakes on our CV, mistakes on... I mean, we've all failed. I mean, I'm sure none of you have, but I've certainly failed myself many times. And, I mean, Shelley, you mentioned the story of the person who would, when asked the question, would you relocate to Shanghai, said no. And that was the end of the interview.
Conversation. I think that's a very good sort of segue into something that we make a point of letting people know about before they graduate. You have to bring something to the interview that will help the interviewer continue the conversation. You never want to go down conversational dead ends. Even if you don't want to go to Shanghai, you have absolutely no desire to live anywhere, south of Watford, it's still important to sound as if you're open to it, because that can lead to another conversation. So what I look for are people who are engaging. So I'm interested in the person. I'm interested in what motivates them, how artistic artistic they are, obviously, or how technical they are, in which case I bring someone else in to talk to them as well. But the ones who stick out in my mind on the positive side are the ones who are so into their own work that they can defend every time you ask them a question about a choice they make. They can defend it in a very articulate way. For example, there was a girl we interviewed last year who was from Supinfocom in France. Fantastic, fantastic designer and actually director. But we were talking about her film, and she could talk about the character in the film, that she wrote the story and animated this character as if it was like a family member. She understood completely what the motivation of this character was. She really felt for her. And that enthusiasm is the thing that normally then draws you into a longer conversation. So your goal in an interview, although none of us have much time, is to kind of pull us in so we want to talk to you more, because out of that conversation other things can come. I mean, what Adam said is about taking any opportunity that will get you in the direction you want to go is absolutely key. You should always express willingness, even if what we're offering may not be exactly what you want to do. If it will lead you in the right direction, and you'll meet people who can mentor you and can help you increase your skills, you should also always be positive about it. You can choose later on not to. It's your choice. But what you don't want to do is shut those doors. At the moment, what I'm chiefly looking for, as Bob is, and as he was saying, is story artists. Story artists are like hen's teeth. They are incredibly difficult to find. I have people calling me from other studios constantly saying, we're desperate. Do you know anybody at all who might be able to come and do story for us? By which they mean someone who can draw, someone who is capable of articulating a staging of a scene visually, so they understand film language, they understand editing, they understand gags. That's a really, really hard one. And those people are very rare. So if you're interested in animation, if your interest is to make animation, maybe to be a character animator, don't rule out the other pathway of storyboarding, because it's a route to directing. In our studio, there are various routes to becoming a director. We never hire somebody straight from school as a director, but several people grow quickly into that role. But one of the routes is story. Another one is layout, which in the UK I think would be previs. If you've had experience, again, film language, editing, staging scenes, getting characters to interact with each other. All these are really important skills. So don't fixate too much on your walk cycle or your rigging and your modeling if you want to be a storyteller. If you want to be a storyteller, we want to see your storyboards. So I would say that's a good gateway job right now. Other than that, the one international job that I'm always looking for people from everywhere for is visual development. That's slightly different, because art direction and visual development is kind of like one of those God-given skills like musical ability. I mean, the people who have got it kind of have it. And by now, if that's what you're interested in, you should know that. So what we can help you do is how to present that work in the best possible way. What sort of character design in a portfolio just kind of immediately excites us. And I'm actually teaching 2 character design programs at the moment at different universities. So I'm very aware of how people present can really, really change your perception of them, as an artist. But the last thing I would say for us, and we're a very big studio with extremely high entry-level standards, is that I never actually run out looking for graduates. I mean, no producer in history has ever rushed into a recruiter office and said, I need a graduate right now. I need the best graduate you can find. What they say is, I need someone with huge potential who I can bring in and train up into this job. So I'm looking for future team leaders. I'm looking for people with the personality to respond to direction, but also to eventually be that person giving direction to other people. So I've got my eye on a guy right now. I just sent him an email this morning who's Chinese but studying in California. And he just told me he's running a team of 60 people at USC making a MA graduation project. And all my antennae went, it's like, I've got my claws deeply embedded in his back now. So I'm looking for those kind of skills, the ability to work with other people, to manage yourself.
You like students who've done group projects, don't you?
Group projects are enormously helpful. In the UK, it's a bit challenging because the academic structure doesn't support group projects quite as much as maybe it could. But if you have a chance...
You guys, I see there's some faces here where you've been working. Group projects are a challenge. They are more of a challenge and that's possibly why we don't do as much of them as we should.
I think it's the academic marking system that is against them, what I'm finding in my academic work. But I do feel that it's so important to show that you are capable of working in a team and being able to add to that team dynamic. Because the other thing we're thinking when we're interviewing you is, how will this person fit into our team? What can they bring to the team that isn't already there? And so if you've already worked in a group with people, I mean, there was one girl at Viborg, remember they have to give their proposals, and she started her final dissertation with, I thought it would be really nice if I brought everybody a cup of tea every morning. And, my first reaction is, oh God, she's completely lost it. But then when I was reading through her thesis, I could see she was trying so hard to be part of the team. Unfortunately, she kind of blew it by not being very good at what she was doing. But the idea that she wanted to prove that she was a supportive team member, and she said it in that first line. I mean, by the way, don't use that line. But it did kind of get across her personality, very quickly. So if you can say, I'm someone who really enjoys being inspired by other people and being a team member and contributing to a group dynamic, that is definitely something that will get you far, I think.
Yeah. Well, what would you say most common mistakes?
I have to go along with the most common mistake. It's actually being the opposite of what I would. The thing I always want to take out of an interview is that he or she would be an absolute pleasure to have in the studio.
Right.
Because if they can tick the technical box off, they can do the task X, whatever it is. And most entry-level jobs are something along the lines of tracking and replacing number plates on moving cars.
Right.
It's a dull, quite monotonous
do this
job.
40 times a day for the next 6 weeks.
12, 9 months to get everyone happy about how. What will get you into that next job, or will get you working closely with the artist who will help bring you up to that, whatever that kind of next level of job is going to be in the studio, is about you having the personality to be a pleasure to have in the studio. And that's the one thing I kind of think. If we've got 6 candidates, they can all do tracking. But candidate A is going to be a pleasure you think is going to be a pleasure to have in the studio.
Yeah.
And conversely, the ones that, can you track number plates onto a car? Yes. That's probably the one that's not coming in the studio. Yeah. Yes, I can do that and so much more.
Yeah.
That's the one I want to hire.
Yeah.
And a lot of it does come out of that, and I know some people are good at interviews and some people are not so good at interviews. But tough, if you're not good, you've got to work on that and really kind of bring a bit of energy and enthusiasm to the task, because that's what will get you the jobs.
Yeah, you want people who sound like they're desperate to work there, don't you?
Not necessarily
maybe
desperate,
not desperate, but keen.
But keen and enthusitic and,
Willing.
Yeah, that idea that nothing's going to be too much trouble and not,
Yeah.
Because they're the people that get along with other people in the studio as well. And that's important because, if you've got, it doesn't matter if it's 15, 25, 250 people, if you've got kind of a good feeling of everyone's working together to get the job done, to get their shots in, that self-perpetuates across the whole team. And that's really important to productivity, that sense of there's a group here and we're all working together and going in the same direction. Being smart and clever and a bit snide every now and again probably isn't going to get you loved in the studio. So really, it's an important part of the whole process.
So Adam, visual effects.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I have to agree with you two that it's a fundamental, because it's such a collaborative process. Really, all in all. You are, everybody's relying on you and you're relying on everybody else. So you have to feed in to this whole process. And in large companies, on large projects, the pipeline is, or can be, quite unforgiving. So you have to slot in and do your bit. And sometimes, it can be a bit frustrating if you name something wrong. You get a slap wrist, and you have to be careful, but you have to be amenable. And once you get to know the ins and outs of a particular company and its ways of working, you can start to feed into that and become part of that whole process of constructing the pipeline, building things, and adding to it. You become somebody who's asked what their opinion is, rather than can you just do this, can you just do that. So by being part of that whole collaborative process, it's give and take. It's you know, you might be asked to help out on this, and it's not what you want to do. You want to be a character animator, but by doing that, somebody else will come in and say, "Oh, I saw what you did there. You know, can you come and help me on this?" Or, you know, what's your opinion? And that way, you grow within the company, and that's a kind of you know, it's a give and take process.
So when you're bringing people in, say, for the rigging department at Cinesite, how do people find are they sending in portfolios, or are they?
Yes, I mean, it's obviously you send in, you can send in a portfolio. You have a set of rigs, you have a set of skills that you produce, bits of video, and you know, typically within rigging, for instance, you know, what's required these days is a lot of scripting. It's not just a you know, dealing with the nuts and bolts. It's actually, you need to be able to take an overview of how to put the rig through the pipeline, what's required. You need to get to grips with that whole process. So your clients, as a rigger, your clients would be the animators. So you need to converse with the animators and have an exchange because, you know, you can create a rig and they'll say, it's too slow, redo it. Or I need a control here, can you make that work? Or it doesn't quite do what I want it to do here on this leg or this foot or this, you know. So that exchange, that you know, give and take is very important. And if somebody's not open to that in the interview, it kind of can stop your progress there and then. So you know, in an interview, ask about what goes on, ask about the pipeline, ask about what, you know, typically what happens in the rigging department, who's in charge of it, who's, you know, is it all script based? I'm talking about rigging, but that's just my activity. I mean, I think the same thing applies whatever activity you're doing.
Excellent.
Actually, there's one other thing, that in every interview you will be asked, do you have any questions?
Yes.
Yeah. So the answer, no, is a really bad one.
Yes, walk in with a question.
So always make sure you've prepared for that. That's because
very good advice.
I see a lot of people that haven't really thought about, oh yeah, I really want to work on this film. Have you got any questions? No.
Yeah.
It's just like, you really haven't thought about this, have you? And it just shows that you've paid a little bit of time, you've read the job advert carefully, and you've thought about it for a day or two before you've actually turned up to the interview.
It's also good to try and find out who's interviewing you.
Yeah.
If you can find out who's interviewing you, then Google them and find out what they've worked on. Go and see what they've worked on, even if it's just a 5-minute clip. A little gentle flattery doesn't necessarily go amiss.
It works, but the other thing is also, it's almost a standard given that if we're interviewing someone for even a fairly technical position, you will always be asked, what's your favourite thing on your reel? You know, what are you most happy with? Which, by the way, should be the very first thing on your reel. And you'll also be asked, and what's the thing you've got on your reel that you think could have been improved, and what would you have done to improve it? And these are sort of giving you opportunities to give us some feedback about the way you work. And that's definitely not a point to say, duh. You know, you really need to have figured out an answer to those two questions, because, first of all, there will always be something you could have improved. if you'd had maybe a bit more time, if you'd thought about it differently. And that's probably the most interesting question to have an answer for, because that shows us your potential, you know, your understanding. And there was one guy who answered that question for 20 minutes in an interview and was so brilliant we hired him on the spot, you know, because he thought about all these things he could have, you know, done had he had another 6 months or something. And so, you know, that idea of coming prepared to an interview without being, you know, completely reading off a script is, I think, very important. I think that's a very good point.
So what I'd like to do now is throw the panel open to questions. And we have a microphone here. So
while Alex is circulating, can we just ask out of interest, how many of you in this room are particularly interested in visual effects as a career? And
show of hands.
About a bit more, about a third of you. How many are interested in character animation? About the same number. And pre-production, design, or story? Okay, so it's about a third of each. And everything, of course. All right, thanks.
Okay, excellent. Does anyone? So if you have a question, we'll give you the mic and let us know who you'd like primarily to answer the question. Hopefully you can see the nameplates. We've got Adam, Bob, and Shelley. Or me, but most of you get to hear from me too much as it is. So. Any questions from anyone? From Pippa? Do you want to?
Hello, this question's for Shelley. DreamWorks began in 1994. What do you think is the key to their success?
Well, there's a question to answer. Well, I began in 1995, exactly 20 years ago last month. So I would say the secret to our continued existence is the fact that we've actually been able to change. In the early days of DreamWorks, if you remember, the very first movie that was started at that famous fireside conversation in 1994 was The Prince of Egypt, which was 2D. It was based on a religious story. It was made at, you know, quite large expense and didn't make a huge profit, although it was a very successful film to launch us. So we would do none of those things today. It was a deliberate choice of that movie to launch the studio, to make a statement about the sort of studio we were going to be, which was like not Disney, not Warner Brothers. It was going to be something different. Since then, we've kind of navigated through almost 30 movies, looking every time to see what sort of stories, first of all, we want to tell, but the audiences want, and that is changing. So I would say every studio of the scale of DreamWorks has had enormous growth, you know, reduction, growth again. Every studio can show this same kind of graph, and we're no different. But I think what saved us is we've always been ready to change, and one of the big changes was being able to think globally. Our first big success was Shrek, which was the first movie that we clearly knew was going to be a hit because it was a date movie. You know, adults went to see it without kids. So that was a huge success for us. And that sort of pointed us in a certain direction. But most recently, what we're aware of is the competition is coming from outside the animation business. It's coming from primarily Marvel. So everybody's going to see movies like Guardians of the Galaxy, which in other times would probably have been an animated film. So again, we're kind of being flexible in the approach that we're taking to the type of stories that we're going to tell in the future. And for someone within the studio, you see that all the time. I mean, it can be painful at times. You have to reduce the number of people working on a project because the project is not quite working out. It has to go back into development. On the other hand, a project is so exciting that it's kind of pulled ahead, and so suddenly everybody is thrown on that project and it sort of throws all the schedules out. That happens as well. So we all have to be flexible enough to be able to jump if that happens. And I think the point I'm trying to make is, as an individual, if you join a studio like that, you can't just go in at day one and expect your job to be this. It's always going to sort of branch off in other directions. And for me personally, when I had my interview with Jeffrey Katzenberg to say, will you come and join us, he actually asked me, this is why he's such a successful, head of studio, he said, what do you want? Which is another extremely good question, by the way, to have an answer for in an interview. And my answer was, I want to be challenged. I feel I had such an amazing experience working for Dick Williams. I wanted that feeling of being pushed and challenged and being asked to do things that I really didn't think I was capable of. And he said, oh, we can give you that. And that's absolutely been the course of my career at the studio. So I think, as a slightly long-winded answer to your question, I think the ability to change and reinvent ourselves probably every 5 years or so, or faster these days, is critical. You can't stay stuck in one particular production environment. You have to accept that that's going to change.
Excellent. Any other questions? Who else wants to ask another question? No one else? No other questions? I certainly remember, yes, Shrek was that came at just the right time at DreamWorks, because there'd been a series of films that hadn't done particularly well. That was yeah. What about portfolios? Anybody got questions on portfolios? Anything like that? Khalid.
How would you make a successful portfolio? Portfolio.
For what? For what particular area?
For character animation.
Well, the first thing I would say is we don't really look at portfolios anymore. We look at people's blogs. So I would say have a really, really good blog or website and update it regularly, because what we want to see is your selection of your work, and usually we want to see your most recent work. So in an interview, if you're showing us work you did 6 months to a year ago, inevitably you're going to be asked, what are you doing now? So on a blog, you can constantly keep that updated so we can sort of evaluate your progress. For character animation, what we look for really is performance. And again, I'm talking about DreamWorks, so our requirements are maybe slightly different for feature animation. What I look for is acting myself. So I don't really want to see a walk cycle unless you put something in it that adds to it. But I will give you one really brilliant example. There was a student from a 1-year program. He didn't even do one of these 4-year programs in France. He did a 1-year CG character animation program. And on the program, they have to do an animal walk. And so his assignment was to do, I think it was like a lion or something. And he did an absolutely very, very successful, simple animal walking, and then it sort of changes into a run, that's it. But then he did an internship at Framestore. And on his internship at Framestore, he asked them to give him one of their rigged animals, again, a lion or something. And then he did another test, which was absolutely brilliant. He had this thing like running around the corner, skidding with its back legs, doing this extraordinary bit of performance. And what that showed to us is what he learned at school and how he applied it as soon as he had an opportunity. I mean, he got the job like instantly. So that's the kind of thing for animation, and it applies to other types of animation. We want to see that you know the basics, but we want to see that you can push it a bit further. So we're not really interested in your life drawing, except if you can do it, obviously that helps. But we really do want to see something that shows that you as an artist have a vision of how you can improve your work. That's really, really critical for us.
Bob, you also hire animators too, so
yeah, I'd kind of put a little bit of a lot of what we've been saying. I mean, particularly for Shelley, DreamWorks is a massive studio that hires very, very specialists doing increasingly specialist tasks. I've also run a 25-seat studio, and our requirements would be slightly different in as much as it's absolutely fantastic if you can find someone that's a character animator who also does modeling and rigging, or yeah, having the versatility to do multiple things. Maybe it's that you can animate and composite. It doesn't matter, but seeing a versatility in people means that we can keep them on staff for longer. If I've got a 25-seat studio and I'm running a job, and I can keep someone on for 16 weeks, it's much better than having someone in for 8 weeks, for me and for them. So, you know, if you've got versatility, you know, you can do a lot of different things. Maybe you want to be hitting the smaller studios, and if you're just really, really good at one thing, yeah.
Yeah, students often ask, don't they, whether you should be a generalist or a specialist, and the answer I think is both. But
yeah.
You're going to disagree. You're allowed to disagree with me.
What I like to see when I say a generalist, someone that can do all of the tasks, but I would rather they said, you know, at the top of their CV, I'm a specialist in, but I'm also very good at X,
Right.
Y, and Z.
So core skill plus some supporting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do it. I've got a CV, and at the front of my CV it says, I've got kind of summary where I just put 5 things that I do
Yeah.
really well with.
I think I'm going to
Fundraising,
change
but-
my CV now, actually.
But just that, there's a summary of your CV that allows someone to go,
Yes.
whoop, right,
Yeah.
I've got this one. Do I want to read the rest?
Yeah.
That's really, really.
Yeah, because I think when you're writing a CV, you think that people are actually going to read it. Of course they do. Duh, they're not going to read it. They're just going to skim it at best,
Yeah.
aren't they? They're going to look for the highlights.
So if you've
Because no
done
one
that,
has time.
done that for them,
Yeah.
the chances of them reading the
Yeah.
detail are much, much greater.
Yeah. Yeah. Adam, did we look at CVs at Cinesite? I don't remember.
No,
But
you do. You give them a cursory glance.
Yeah, you get a quick look, yeah.
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 What has this guy done? What
Yeah.
can he do? Or
Yeah.
girl? Or
How long should a CV be? 10 pages? 20?
Max 2
Yeah,
pages.
Max 2 pages, yeah.
One is preferable.
One
And
is-
never ever have it on a white lettering on a black background. Oh, I have so many French
really?
students that think it's so cool to send, beautifully typographed, kind of headings on things. I just want to be able to read it and then forward it to somebody.
Right. Yes. Right, any other questions? Kaleem, bring that. You got the microphone. There you go.
Yeah, so you say that you often have to let employees go after a certain project's completed, and obviously they'd move on after that. But is it unusual to see them come back to the same company?
Good question. I mean, not at all. And in fact, that would be the preference, because if you spent a long time, bringing somebody into your company, especially if they're a graduate hire, and you've trained them up, you absolutely want to get them back again. But I think going back to what Bob was saying, I mean, our environment about 6 years ago, I would have absolutely said we hire specialists. So if we're going to hire an animator, they're going to be the best of the best. But actually, our environment too is changing. So generalists now have more of a place, because if we do have to downsize a team for whatever reason, if the schedules change or whatever, we want to be able to move people onto other projects. So quite often, someone who's in animation might be given the option to switch into storyboarding if that becomes the next thing. Similarly, effects, there are various different departments where people can be working on one thing, but they might go into a different pipeline. So to be flexible in that way, can be very helpful. Yes, it's always regrettable when we have to, let people go that we've worked so hard to bring into the company. But many, many people come back again. We have people come to and fro all the time. Most notably, Brenda Chapman just came back to us, having gone off and made Brave and
Right.
various other things after she was one of the directors of Prince of Egypt. So as a director, she's come back to us now. So that's good.
Yes.
I think for the indies, it's a different story again, because if you're doing indie productions, generally the nature of the engagement is it's a fixed short-term contract to do a specific task for a specific number of weeks. So yeah, I've used the same production manager on 3 projects, the same head of storyboard on 4, character designers on at least 3. So
I mean, once your team works in an environment,
Who wants a
you tend
mess?
exactly you tend to stick with a team. So if you have to let them go, you let them go, and then you try and get them back when you need.
Yeah.
So establishing those relationships is always.
But London's always had a freelance culture up
Yeah.
until, maybe about 10 years ago, when long contracts started to come in, because a lot of people were going to Weta and places like that. So for self-defense,
Right.
long contracts came in. But I think generally you should assume you'll be working on lots of different projects for a while, rather than be for a year or 2 at the same studio. And it's a good thing, because to learn how to work in different environments with different people not only helps your people skills, but it also makes you a hell of a lot of contacts who will be useful to you as your career progresses. And we're always being asked, the first thing that happens in a recruitment session is that the person who's hiring, the head of department, will be asked by one of the recruiters, who do you want? So number one is we'll go after people that the department head already knows about. And it's only then that you say, well, that person's not available, who else do you know? And so generally, if you have an in with a studio, even if you've been let go again, that gives you an enormous advantage to be brought back in again later.
the last film that I did, we only actually put out 2 adverts and hired 250 people.
because once we put out the first advert, we got a head of department,
Right.
and a couple of others. So we had a storyboard team, a head of department for editorial, and the rest of the team, we either knew someone that could come in as head of department. When you hire the head of department, they pretty much hire the crew. So if they've got a team that they've worked with, they'll know. And the other people that we had were really about finding a group. We had 12 trainees out of that 250 that were coming in, first jobbers. And we got most of those because someone working on the film was either a course tutor or knew the course tutor. We happened to be based in Cardiff, so right beside the atrium. It was fairly easy to find trainee compositors. Just walked across the street and asked them. But
I was just going to say, again, in terms of if you're in a large or even a small environment, if, for instance, you're a rigger, like I was, and the shot or the show might need somebody to do hair or cloth. That's just a little transition for you to make, and you're still employed. And just put your hand up, and say, I'll do that. And
once you're in, keep in there because they'll keep paying you.
Exactly.
Much better 16 weeks than.
And at Cinesite, everyone used to go to the pub on a Friday night.
That's always useful. That's always useful. Yeah.
And you'd hear all half the talk at the
As long
pub
as you
would
don't
be.
drink too much.
Yeah. But half the talk at the pub would be with people from other studios, and they'd all be talking about what the project was.
Who needs what?
Who needs what, and who's looking, who's hiring, who's firing.
In London, Festivus is quite good for that. There's it's kind of a social network for freelancers in animation. So that's
also, there's now a SIGGRAPH chapter in London, which is fantastic because there are get-togethers from time to time. Amazing people like Glenn Keane was there recently, giving lectures.
And doing courses. That's the other thing that's really, if there's a kind of an area you want to do a little bit more training in or kind of a related skill that you want to develop, going on those courses, you meet other people who are freelancing, who are involved in that area.
You mean like short courses?
Yeah, just like short weekends. Skill set do some really, really short 1 week course in hair for Maya animators or something.
Yeah. There's an animation masterclass in London coming up in April, I think.
Someone from DreamWorks is coming, Jason Schleifer's coming.
That's right, yeah.
And Film London, we sponsor the Frank Gladstone one in conjunction with Skillset and Lupus. And there's a whole number of these short courses that are a great way to meet people who might hear a job, you might have coffee with them and go, oh yeah, I know that guy, he was really good.
Yeah.
That's how it happens.
Excellent. Well, let's take one more question and then we'll get Shelley's laptop hooked up because she's got some stuff to show. But anyone else got a question in the meantime? One at the back there. Let me take that back.
When do you guys graduate? Is it this year or next year? Next year. So you've got another full year to go. Okay. Good.
I think there's various different folks at different stages. Some in the first year, some. So, question at the back.
What are the main pros and cons about each of the fields within animation?
Pros and cons of you mean the different? You mean different areas of the industry, like character animation versus visual effects, or who wants to take that one?
Okay, that one seems to sit on me a little bit. I have heard from both graduates who've gone into the studio, not just my studio, other big studios, and also from the supervisors who I asked this question to, that there is a certain level of frustration that can sometimes set in for high flyers. For example, if we hire somebody who's a really, really brilliant visual development person, a background artist or something like that, or a very good animator who's made a wonderful student film, and that tends to be the graduates from France, for example. They find that the entry-level job can be a little bit frustrating because they come in with this amazing portfolio, brilliant visual development art, and they're designing props for 6 months. And, for Kung Fu Panda 4. So I think you have to really manage your expectations when you get out into the industry, and be aware that it's not about hiding your light under a bushel, but it might be hard to have your full brilliance recognised within the first 6 months or so. You know, you hopefully will be given the opportunity to shine, but the chances are, as you say, you'll be rotoing, you know, number plates off the back of cars, which is a bit hard to, you know, do more brilliantly than the person sitting next to you. So a really great story I heard recently from a French student who did an internship at McGuff in Paris was that a whole group of these very talented students all got internships in the same place. So they kind of sat together, they were working together on similar projects, and he felt it was difficult to really engage with any of the artists on the crew. They were in the little sort of ghetto of trainees. So what he did, which was just so brilliant, is he joined the football team. And he's lousy at football. He said, it's not my thing at all, but I thought it's the best way to meet the other people, you know, working on Minions, the movie. And of course, as soon as he asked them, would you come and look at my work, they were there. And guess who got hired first of the entire group of very talented students? So I think a little bit it's you make your own chances, but I would say that one, the frustration level for graduates entering industry is a challenge a little bit. And so for a feature film environment with a very large crew, I would say that's one consideration versus working in a very small studio where you probably have the chance to do lots of different things and find, you know, opportunities probably slightly more quickly. The one thing I would say that is the absolute optimum best opportunity is working in a startup. If you can be part of something really from the ground up, maybe it's setting up something with friends or joining a very small studio that has the chance of growing, then you will actually progress much, much faster because more opportunities will come your way. So I think in a very general sense, that to me would be the pros and cons. A big studio, you'll have the chance to learn so much from incredibly gifted people who are the leaders in the industry. But in a small studio, you might have a chance to do more cool stuff, you know.
Learning by doing.
Initiative. As I think all of us seem to have taken that route too.
I think, you know, there's a really kind of good example. There's a chap called Darren who I hired who had been making coffee at Frame Store for 9 months. And I actually hired him over one of the people he was making coffee for because I thought he'd already done some design work that looked pretty close to what we wanted for the film, so I knew he'd be right. So anyway, he came and worked, I think he did 8 months with me. His job came to an end. We didn't need any more design work. He packed up and I got to the end of the production. I said, what got in touch with him by email. I said, hey Darren, what are you doing? I've got another project starting up soon. He said, I'd love to, but I'm doing Da Vinci's Demons now. He was one of the lead designers on Da Vinci's Demons, like, from being a runner in 2 years. So you can, it does happen.
Is it good to be a runner? Should
you know,
is that a good job or is it a?
It's often the only way you can get yourself known, and the people that stay being runners for a long time probably are not doing themselves any favours.
What's a long time though? How long?
It depends on how long you can afford to. I mean, there are a number of different things around that. I personally have never ever had anyone that I've hired as a runner because I don't think it's a good idea. When I'm running a studio, I would rather have someone be the assistant trainee to the junior storyboard artist than call them a runner.
Right.
Because and I get very cross with artists who expect people to go and make them coffee. I just have an attitude. It's disrespectful to the people around you.
Yeah.
My view. I mean, you could take a view that actually you want that artist not to be up off their seat getting a cup of coffee because they're more productive when they're sat at the desk. But my general feeling is that actually what I want is a really, really productive team of people who are respectful to each other and work hard and play hard together. And I think there's a balance to be said between, if you make someone too subservient in the studio structure, I think that's unhelpful. So generally, trainees that I hire, they might be setting up shots in Nuke for the compositor.
Yeah.
So that, gathering the assets, getting the shot ready so that your artist can be more productive there. They might be organising the storyboard artist work for continuity purposes before it gets to the editor. So something like that's a really good in entry level, or removing number plates.
But also learning the pipeline, because if you're
learn
moving
about being and working in a studio from that.
Occasionally, they do have to go off and run the odd chore for the studio, but really the idea of calling them a runner and labelling them as the person that makes coffee for the artist, I don't think that's right. But that might be your only chance to get in, and it might get you in the door and get you known by 50 people at Framestore. That's fantastic. I mean, the most important thing you will do in your first 2 years in the industry is make contacts, phone numbers, emails, friendships that will last you. I'm still friends with people that I started at the BBC with, and we're all doing different things in different parts of the entertainment industry. It's a really powerful and important thing. The other thing that you should go out and look for is training bursaries. There's a number of those about.
Oh yes,
and
you were telling me about something.
I'm running one with Creative Access to get Black, Asian, minority, ethnic graduates their first job in animation. So that is run through Creative Access. I don't sponsor the training positions themselves. I sponsor the companies to hire them.
So how would we know which companies were looking to fill those places?
Well, on that particular program, it's all advertised through something called Creative Access. So if you have, if you fall into the category of Black, Asian, or minority ethnic, you should look at Creative Access. I think it's .org, but it might be .com. But look at Creative Access. Yeah. We fund about 12 posts a year.
All right, and that's like, so that's a...
And it's what it is, it's a 12-month bursary of, I think, £15,000, which is the sort of living London wage. Yeah. And there's a certifiable training outcome. It's great for the company because the company doesn't have to pay national insurance on your money. It's great for you if you fit into that category. So that's, but you should also look, skill set run, similar training programs to get people into their first jobs. So you should definitely be looking at those areas.
So thank you so much to the three of you for coming in. It's been really helpful and interesting. Thank you.